Following the uprisings of 2020, Democrats who ran for office last year were able to get not only the presidency, but also the U.S. Senate, something that was unthinkable to them just 5 years previously. This is what happened after the uprisings. This was the result of all those young people taking to the streets and making their displeasure with the status quo manifestly apparent. Now the Democrats have the total political upper hand. So, to the extent that there could be a political challenge to the Democrats, what would be the biggest political threat facing the Democrats? Now, obviously, you would say the biggest threat to the Democrats are all of these red states that are passing these draconian voter suppression laws, making it where the Republicans, either at the county or state level, can just arbitrarily overturn an election simply because. Or perhaps you would say that it's the white supremacist militias that are hatching plans to kidnap Democratic politicians, such as the plot against Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer last year. Well, if you talk to the good white folks over at CNN, you would be wrong. According to CNN, the biggest threat that the Democrats face are the very young, outspoken voters who gave them the presidency and the Senate in the first place. If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like, as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. Yesterday, TBA gave a brilliant broadcast where he was breaking down precisely this very issue. I've linked to it on my Twitter page. TBA's broadcast was prompted in part by the story that I had posted on my Twitter feed, but I didn't post that simply because CNN had said it. I posted it because in the last couple of months, I couldn't help but notice that from CNN and MSNBC, they've been ratcheting up the tempo on this little narrative of theirs that's basically drawing a clear distinction between the Democrats and so-called progressives. Now, the sharpest expression of this little talking point that they're trying to push has been to focus on the word woke as a euphemism for black. Now, those of us who are part of the black grassroots, while we may feel that there is some rhetorical validity to some of what the people who espouse being woke have to say, at the end of the day, we don't call ourselves that. We're not with that at all, but the white media is taking this term that we have not adopted and that none of us are actually claiming, and they're taking everything that we have done that challenges white supremacy and they're putting it under that heading, woke. And what they're saying is that all these woke people are a threat. All of these woke people are going to take down the Democrats. Well, it's these woke people who handed the Democrats the presidency and control of both houses of Congress. But the white media's talking point has been, they're going to blow it for the Democrats. Oh, what they say is not popular. These people they're just as bad as the alt-right. Oh, these guys, that's what they're trying to do, bring some sort of lie about a false equivalence. Of course, this is not something that these clowns were saying just a few years ago. In 2017, as the primaries were heating up, you had Chris Matthews, back when he was on MSNBC, saying that progressives need to vote. The gist of Matthews' little piece had to center around the Virginia governor's race in particular, but as he put it, if the progressives don't turn out to vote in historic numbers, well, the people who like to cling to Confederate statues are going to be the ones who wind up winning the day. Of course, as we all know, Democrats wound up reclaiming the House of Representatives, and they did it by a larger margin than organizations such as Politico thought that they would. Politico was saying that the Dems were going to get 31 seats. The Democrats wound up actually getting 40. So what that means is, after all of the protests and uprisings in Ferguson and Baltimore and elsewhere that had taken place, where we had such luminaries as these white supremacists who are basically right-wingers in drag on cable TV saying that all of this stuff is going to be losing in Democrats' elections, and Democrats won elections because of it, young people getting galvanized. But what also happened was you had the white establishment, such as it was, at least the hardliners of it, the rhetorical hardliners, I should say. These guys were also getting on the defensive. because what they understood was people were getting mobilized against them. But you know who else was also getting on the defensive? The controlled opposition, otherwise known as the Democrats. So whereas 3 years ago, Chris Matthews was saying progressives need to vote, well, this continued all the way into 2020. MSNBC was saying that progressives, moderates, can beat Trump. But things changed after the 2020 election. Apparently a new tune was being sung, because here we are in 2021 and you got no less than Eric Adams, Officer Eric Adams, I should say, the NYPD's Negro informant on the scene. And he's saying that Democrats have room under that tent to unite with progressives. The people who have been leading the charge to get the Democrats in the driver's seat and get them their majorities in Congress and get them the presidency have been the progressives. But the way that the Eric Adams and others talk, I mean, this Eric Adams guy, he talks as if he's a Democrat bigwig party boss. That's how you know that this chump, as we told you, he was cherry-picked, hand-picked. Oh, he is in fact speaking for the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chuck Schumers and the other Democratic bigwigs, the ones who are actually in charge of the party, and making it very clear, well, there could be room to unite with progressives. Now, notice that wording. What he's saying is progressives are on the outside. All of these troublemakers talking about punishing the police. All these troublemakers, they're outside. Well, you know, maybe we could make some room for them. So in less than a year, MSNBC's coverage has gone from that progressives and moderates can beat Trump to just, well, what about these progressives? This is how you know that there is a political party line that's being pushed. The connection between media and the political parties is absolutely incestuous. You have never seen the white media pushing the idea that the Republicans and the conservatives are somehow separate. No, they're one and the same. They make it very clear. In fact, it's not really the Republican Party, it's the Conservative Party with some so-called Republican tenets. They make it very clear with that. But with the Democrats, they're saying, well, there's a difference. They want to make it very clear. There's a difference between the Democratic Party and the quote-unquote progressives. That's what's happening here. They make it clear that there's a distinction, there's a line, there's a difference. Oh no, the Democratic Party is drawing a line between themselves and those progressives. You see, the Republicans are never challenged on whether or not they need to be conservative. What are you going to do about these conservatives? Don't you have a problem with these conservatives? No, if anything, when the Republicans, when they lose an election, they say it's because we weren't conservative enough. And since the Republican Party is the party of the establishment, at least they are the party that officially espouses and spouts the party line for the establishment, that being the case, there's not going to be any pressure on them to separate themselves from conservatives or conservatism. That's never going to be the narrative. Oh no, it's okay for them to have it where Republicans and conservatives are part and parcel. They're the exact same thing. That's okay. But the Democrats, on the other hand, well, you know, you guys should leave it up to the responsible mind. Well, you can't push too hard for these things. In fact, you shouldn't push for them at all. It's okay to talk about it, but we shouldn't expect these things to actually happen, especially not where black people are concerned. And what are the Democrats going to do about these progressives, well, particularly the ones who are demanding that the police be punished? When a man brags that he's the Biden of Brooklyn, that's how you know you got sold out. This is a talking point, a narrative that they want out there. Now, this narrative has nothing to do with elections and votes. As TBA broke down in his broadcast yesterday, the 720 degrees of analyses that you can't get anywhere else, he looked at some of the stuff that Chris the Lizard, Saliza, was saying, and those asinine little polls that he was pointing to. First of all, the first thing to remember is that when it comes to politics, the only time that they bring up polls is whenever it reinforces something that they already want out there, that they already believe, and that they want other people to go for. That's the only time they bring up polls. They don't bring up polls if it's something that they don't like. If it's something that they're against, then they'll bring up a poll saying, oh, the party's being hurt by this, we're losing and this and losing, and you guys need to knock it off with that. That's the only time they bring up a poll that might be negative for the party, if it's only something that they believe. But remember, as I explained to you, when it comes to black people, there are no polls that ever favor anything that we are going to be advantaged by. You go back to 1859, the eve of the Civil War. You think if you took any polls about abolishing slavery that you would have had at least 50% of people in favor of it? Hey, how about ending segregation? You think that that would have been something that would have gotten 70% support or even 50%? I explained to you how when the first polls of any note started being taken in regards to black people, Dr. King's March on Washington, man, you barely could get even 25% of people who would say that they thought that the march was a good idea. 70% of the population were against it. And that trend of basically no more than at any given point, the most you can get is 25% of people saying that they're in favor of something that might tangentially be advantageous to black people. That number hasn't shifted. The NFL players, the athletes protest, taking a knee, that didn't have any better than 30% support. You see, you have people who try to run government by polling, and what they're really saying is only if it's something that I agree with. So let's understand that when it comes to polls, the white media bringing that up, they're bringing only up the things that they think they can put a slant on that pushes to what they already want. And when you point out, hey, there have been protests and uprisings and Black Lives Matters for at least 8 years since the murder of Trayvon Martin, and even after the uprisings of 2020, the Democrats wound up knocking the Republicans out. The Republicans have been on their back foot. The bastards have been on their heels. They've been on the defensive. Seems to me the woke folks are where the smart money's at. And CNN knows that, as do the Democrats. I wasn't just whistling Dixie when I pointed out to you that what Rahm Emanuel and others were saying about how it's time to start appealing to those Biden conservatives. Yeah, we're talking about those so-called moderates, read casual racists. Let me tell you something. When it comes to being in the face of white supremacist aggression, there can be no moderation. A moderate is just another word for either a collaborator or a coward, one or the other. When you're fighting white supremacy, there is no place for moderation because the white supremacist is not trying to be moderate with you. And bringing out some clown, some bootlicking bastard like Eric Adams, he isn't swaying anyone's opinion. Oh yeah, his job is to go ahead and lend his melanin to whatever lies that the left arm of white supremacy wants to push. But my point is, you see that the exact same rhetoric regarding anything that black people are pushing for, the same tactics that are being used on the right are also being used on the left. Christopher Rufo, who manufactured his own little completely disassociated definition of critical race theory and decided that he was going to try to manufacture and gin up a moral panic, which is already running out of steam, by the way. The same way that he decided that he would take something, some sort of any word that he sees black people using, and let me see if I can get Fox News and the well-heeled billionaires behind these right-wing white supremacist think tanks to help me create some sort of hysteria over it out of whole cloth as we create a straw man and then proceed to beat it to death. You see the folks over at CNN and MSNBC and some of these other white publications doing the same thing on the left. Oh, woke is a bad thing. What are you talking about? It wins you elections. Oh, it's going to lose elections. Really? Is that how Biden got the keys to the White House? There was no candidate of wokeness on the ballot in the Democratic primary for mayor of New York. Eric Adams did not get the nomination because he ran as the anti-woke candidate. There was nobody running as the woke candidate. Wokeness has not been on the ballot, so how can anyone say that wokeness loses elections? And to the extent that wokeness is perceived as part of the Democratic Party platform, it seems to be the winning platform. It damn sure ain't the mealy-mouthed nonsense that you would be hearing from the Nancy Pelosi's and Chuck Schumers. They've been the ones losing elections. But that's the entire point. There is a political media operation underway. You thought to yourself that CNN and Fox News just couldn't agree on anything? Why, you've had an ongoing spitball fight for the last few months between CNN's Brian Seltzer and Fox's Tucker Carlson. Oh, these guys, to take it first blush, as far as what you see them doing on air, why, you would think that these guys, they're ready to go to each other's respective corporate headquarters and start brawling in the doggone lobby is what you would think. Oh, but as I explained to you, when it comes to black people, there is no left wing or right wing. There is no Republican or Democrat, conservative nor liberal. It is simply the white supremacists. When you look at Chris Cillizza's little hit piece, as TBA pointed out, every time he says woke, he made sure that he would put up a little graphic on the screen with black people in it. And when talking about the worst excesses of quote-unquote wokeness, it's everything that the black grassroots demands, that the police be punished. And when it comes to the economic wealth that we generated being put in our hands instead of remaining in the hands of the people who didn't do a damn thing to earn it. Oh yeah, that's what he wanted to make crystal clear. See, when it comes to wokeness, he left out transgender bathrooms. Oh no, that's not really part of it. Oh no, when it comes to that, we're not talking about that because that would make certain people at CNN, Anderson Cooper, Don Lemonade, but mostly Anderson Cooper because they don't give a damn about what Don Lemonade thinks. Oh no, they wouldn't like that. So we got to make sure that wokeness doesn't include that, but it includes all of this racial stuff. Oh, that's going to lose Democrats' elections because you're going to be having white people, particularly white people in the suburbs, who are going to fall more and more into the orbit of the right wing. Yeah, because nobody's been trying to appeal to them all along. Just keep in mind, these are the same people who just 8 months ago were pointing out that Trump was setting himself up to lose precisely because he was losing suburban support. And why was he losing suburban support? Because of all of his coarse behavior and all the rest of it. But you notice how CNN and MSNBC, they haven't been going on a tear about the Texas Legislature's Senate passing that bill that was going to no longer require that the KKK be taught in schools as morally repugnant. They haven't been going on a tear about that. It would be logical that you link the moral panic and the outrageous hysteria that Chris Rufo and his CRT mania has been fanning to what the Texas legislature has been doing, that you obviously see this is the plan all along. Nobody's been telling Rufo, hey, didn't you promise us that this is the very thing that wouldn't happen, that you guys were not trying to end any sort of teaching of slavery, which is also part of what that Texas Senate Bill 3 was about. Oh no, they're not bringing him into correct on that. And the reason why is that's the white media's job, to give cover and justification to the very mouthpieces who prop up white supremacy. Oh no, the Democrats' biggest problem are not the gun-toting thugs who laid siege to the Michigan State House. Democrats' biggest problem is not the Texas legislature passing all manner of unconstitutional voter restriction, truth be told, voter elimination laws, and these other red states doing the same. That's not the biggest threat to the Democrats. The biggest threat happens to be the people who are demanding that things that need to be changed actually be changed. This is a narrative that you better believe comes from the top down from the Democratic Party leadership. This is just to make the point. It was no coincidence when Negro Jim Clyburn called himself saying, we lost the South Carolina Senate race. Our candidate lost because of all of these people causing problems, demanding defund the police. Stop sloganizing. Stop sloganizing. Sloganizing kills. Yeah, because the white supremacist thugs with badges don't, right? The Democrats' inaction in the face of all of this white supremacist violence doesn't kill. Oh, but the people who are demanding that the police be held accountable and punished for their behavior, that's what kills. Since Negro Jim Clyburn and Chris Cillizza are so hot and bothered about the quote-unquote woke mob and how sloganizing kills, how many people have died at the hands of the woke mob? How many people have been killed as a result of the woke mob's sloganizing? Now, how many people have died at the hands of these right-wing extremists? I'm talking about the ones with badges, not just the ones who stormed the Capitol. But how many people have the cops killed? How many of them have died? And why isn't Negro Jim Clyburn so worked up over that? No, you don't have anybody in the Democratic Party or in the white media who point out that Blue Lives Matters is a lie. and that it's a lie that kills because it's used as a justification to protect murderers and to keep murderers and rapists and thieves and thugs from actually being punished for their crimes. Nobody points out that Blue Lives Matters kills. That kind of sloganizing apparently never gets called out. Chris the Lizard has no problem with that. And the reason why is, when you look at who it is who actually owns the white media, the well-heeled billionaires who happen to own the various white media outlets are the very ones who benefit from having an armed group of thugs who are going to make sure that when these guys are allowed to buy land or allowed to violate people's rights, it can be done. They can just do it with impunity. And that's the reason why you never see CNN or MSNBC or anybody else going in on the police commissioners and calling them out and saying, you guys need to be held accountable. No, they bring them on as a freaking love fest. And that is because behind every racist and unconstitutional law, behind every racist and unconstitutional court ruling happens to be the necessity of force to enforce it. People do not willingly go along with their own oppression. They have to be coerced or tricked into doing so, preferably both. You need a multitude of systems to be in place to keep people controlled and corralled and repressed for the long haul. And this way, you're making it where these people think that they actually have choices in the society as to how to better their condition, when the truth of the matter is they only have the false options and the very real violence that the dominant society presents them with. Oh, you have to continue going to the polls and voting for one of this slate of hand-picked bootlicks that we put in front of you. If you don't have an out-and-out white supremacist like Joe Biden, then you'll have some black suck-up like an Eric Adams or like a Val Demings. You can choose for one of them. Great, so I get to choose from either the white supremacists or their Negro mascots. See, the Democratic Party has been hard at work trying to force a counter-narrative against what the black grassroots have been doing. There was no question that Joe Biden was going to be choosing Kamala Harris to be his running mate. And the main reason happens to be the Democratic Party wants to make it very clear, all of these people talking about disarming and breaking the enforcement arm of white supremacy, well, we're going to show that the Democrats are staunchly against that. What, you think it's some sort of coincidence that Val Demings and Eric Adams, both of them career police officers, that these guys have been cherry-picked and handpicked by the Democrats to be their standard bearers now? Oh, Val Demings, she's got presidential potential. This woman could, oh, why, a lot of people have been saying that she could be a presidential contender. Well, who's been saying that? Well, the white folks who own CNN and MSNBC, those are the ones who've been saying it. Nobody else is saying it, but they do. What, you think Eric Adams was chosen because of the fact that somebody thought that he has charisma? The dude's got all the charisma of a dish rag. A damp dish rag. This is a program at work. The same way that you see people like Christopher Rufo who have spelled out exactly what his strategy was. I'm going to take a word that I hear these black folks using, and it's a word that nobody's heard of, but that's okay, given the fact that we got Fox News working hand in hand with these right-wing think tanks. We're going to take this phrase and say, have you heard of this new threat called critical race theory? We're going to take it and apply a definition that has no bearing to the real thing, and what we're going to do is try to cause a moral panic over it. And we're going to try to make that term toxic. And what we're actually going to do is to take anything that has to do with teaching about the evils of white supremacy and how white people in America have benefited from white supremacy and black people have suffered because of it. We're going to take that. We're going to make it very clear we got to stand up for white supremacy. And then you got the Democratic equivalent saying, well, this talking about defunding the police and punishing the police and all of this talk about black people being empowered on their own terms. Why, that's very unpopular, you see. It's a threat, in fact, you see. And you see that they got these guys going heavy in the paint for this. What that tells you is we're on the right track. This is the way to go. Now, as far as woke goes, there are a lot of these fools who run around calling themselves woke who are nothing more than a bunch of half-brained intersectionalists. We have no truck with them, but the thing about it is, you do have a lot of the white media who would like to try to take everything that we stand for that's been moving the needle and try to place it underneath that umbrella term. So we have to be aware of what's happening here. A straw man is being created by both the left and the so-called right. Oh, you thought that the Democrats and Republicans couldn't agree on anything. Well, they seem to be able to agree on this. Oh, you thought that the right wing, so-called right wing and so-called left wing media couldn't agree on anything, and yet they all agree on this. And this has been going on for a while now. This is going to be their political strategy. The enemy that they have are not the Republicans. Chris the Lizard told you that. He said it with his own duplicitous forked tongue. The biggest threat facing the Democrats are not the Republicans. It's these folks out here, and the main thing that he kept talking about was defunding the police. In other words, black people, because that's the image that he kept putting up on the screen. And notice how the default narrative is not, how do Democrats get more of these white suburbanites to be in favor of these policies that the Democrats' grassroots are pushing? How can they convince and persuade people? Notice how that is not the narrative. That's not their default standard position. Instead, it's, this is bad. Well, Democrats are winning elections because of it. Well, that doesn't really matter. What matters is that these are not popular. Nobody points out that Confederate statues are not popular. Notice that's never the standard position. It's not a matter of, all you Republicans clinging to these long dead traitors and such. People are not in favor of that. Nobody supports that. The white media standard position is not the biggest threat to the Republicans, happens to be their irrational, violent white supremacist base, as opposed to the more casual white supremacist base for the Democrats that the Democrats are hoping to woo and hoping to appeal to. They don't point that out. They don't say that. Oh, no, that's how you know what position that they're actually standing for. Oh, black folks are fine as long as black folks are the long-suffering, downtrodden mascots for this or that party. But as soon as black folks stand up and start saying we're going to be exercising power over the very white supremacists who have been attacking us, then all of a sudden, you Democrats got a real problem here. The entire purpose of this little media political exercise is to give themselves permission, a classic staple of white supremacist culture, to give themselves permission, bestow upon themselves the prerogative to go after the people challenging white supremacy. It's not a matter of that they need to get some sort of consensus from the population. They have the white media claiming, there's problems with these people. They're going to blow it for the Democrats, and these guys are a threat. These guys are a threat. Threat? I could see if he said problem or dilemma or challenge, but threat? Threat implies people are going to get hurt and killed. Threat is what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. Threat are white supremacists marching into the Michigan State House with assault rifles. Threat happens to be the white supremacists in the streets talking about how they're going to be establishing the U.S. as a white ethno-state. No, nobody seems to have the standard. All of a sudden, 6 months after the insurrection, we're not hearing anyone pointing out how the Republicans are going to go down in flames unless they distance themselves from these white supremacists. No, the frame is we got to get these white supremacists to calm down. After all, as I explained to you, white unity must be maintained at all costs. But the real threat happens to be these black folks. We got to restore the status quo that makes it very clear that America is the white man's oyster, and black people just have to accept that they have no part in that America wasn't meant for them, and that black folks are going to be at the bottom, and that is going to be enforced. Oh, we see what you Negroes have done. You're turning democracy against itself. No, what's happening is democracy is actually being used for the first time in this country's putrid 245-year history. The uprisings of 2020, that was democracy in its purest form. When the people are suffering unrelenting tyranny by the state, and it's obvious that you've got a two-party duopoly who are hell-bound and determined to keep that oppression and violence in place, and the people make it very clear, God dang it, we are this country. We are this government. You fools in Congress are supposed to be nothing more than our appointed custodians for it, but we're your boss, and we ain't happy with the job you've been doing. So understand what's happening here. The white media is leading the charge and the Democrats are helping them to do so. This is not about the 2022 midterms. Please don't go getting confused about that. This is not what happens is practically every midterm election, the House or Senate or both shift from one party to the next. That's not what this is about. What this happens to be about is the economic and social and political threat that black empowerment poses. White supremacy is a three-legged stool. The administrative arm, which happens to be business and the government in that order. The propaganda arm, which happens to be the white media, who are white businesses. And, of course, the enforcement arm of white supremacy, the thugs in blue. If you remove any of those three legs, the damn thing falls over. White supremacy does not stand because it is agreed upon to be just. It is the very antithesis of justice. It's the opposite of justice. White supremacy stands because it uses deceit, deception, and unrelenting violence in order to make sure that it is not challenged. If they cannot confuse you from within, then they brutalize you from without. And when you see the white media getting together with their Democrat pals, like James Carville, the Cajun Klansman. I mean, why doesn't he just stop faking and just go ahead and bring his dirty little bedsheet and dunce cap out of the closet? I've been saving my Klan uniform for just the right occasion. I think this is the right time to bring it out. These are supposed to be the people speaking for black folks. Come on. What their job is to control the black community, to control black consensus and political action and focus. Get us off our square. Bring in some fool who the white media is going to hype because they know that black people are easily distracted by whatever is the loudest thing in front of them or the shiniest object. Whatever gets the most ink or the most attention from the white media, especially if we got a bunch of white folks standing beside him. Why, this Negro, he's getting the kind of attention from the dominant society that I wishes I could get. That Willie Lynch chip begins to operate, and black folks, too many of us, go for it. Slowly, that is changing. And that's why they're so scared right now. See, black folks have conditioned themselves to be completely and thoroughly anesthetized to our own destruction, but the dominant society is not. They are not merely sensitive to any changes, they are ultra hypersensitive to any changes. Oh, of course, these black folks of the grassroots who are rabble-rousing and causing all this trouble, they don't have the ability to put any pain on white supremacy in the political arena today. They don't have anybody in the political arena who is talking about reparations unapologetically today, or who is calling out the Democrats as exactly what they are, nothing more than a white supremacist leftist club. That's not happening today. But as they continue to apply the pressure, as they persist in their efforts, this is going to change. Oh, paying lip service to these guys ain't gonna work. That's what they notice. So now what's happening is we're going to label everything that they say. See, they're not mentioning us by name yet. They're going to get around to that. I warned you about that. I told you that we were not yet in a position to call ourselves taking on the white media directly, though we may have to at some point, ready or not. They're not going after us personally yet, but that is coming. So right now they're going after our talking points. You saw this with Joy Reid on her show. You got to get a black face to go ahead and sell the white lies. You can't have it where the Chris the Lizards come out first. You got to have some black front person, Joy Reid, saying that anybody talking about reparations, this is how you identify the Russian bots. Anyone talking about reparations. Anyone calling themselves FBA or DAS, anyone like that. That's how you identify people talking about reparations and such. That's how you know that these are Russian bots. That was a major attempt by the white media to delegitimize us, to discredit us. And to make it where whenever we speak, people would say, oh, those are just Russian bots. But what they didn't realize was we had already made our inroads with the black grassroots. There's too many of us out here for you to say that all of us are Russian bots. We've been out here making too many inroads, making too much progress, reaching the people. So that wasn't going to work, but they had to try. So now comes the next stage. We're going to attack what these guys say, but we're also going to make it very clear that the 2022 election is going to be a referendum by the Democrats against all this stuff that the black grassroots have been pushing for. And the Democrats will give themselves permission to say that America doesn't want that. All of that stuff you guys were doing, that 2020 stuff, that nobody cares about that. Nobody supports that anymore. Oh, there won't be any woke candidates on the ballot, as there were none in 2020, as there were none in the Democratic primaries in New York or any of these other elections. There won't be, and yet they're going to be claiming that they ran against wokeness anyway. This is what you had on Morning Joe. I showed you on my Twitter feed about that little harpy who was claiming that the mayor's race, the Democratic mayor's primary, that this was basically a referendum on all that woke stuff. Well, you see, people might say that, but, the truth is nobody actually wants that. Even the Democrats know that that doesn't win elections. When the truth of the matter was, they are setting up their own narrative. There was nobody who was on the ballot in New York of any note who was not put there by the Democrats themselves. So how can you say that the people had a voice when the people had no chance to actually choose who was on the ballot? Big money made the choice. Learn to recognize when you're being manipulated. Look at your enemy in holistic terms. Don't get tunnel vision. When you see these bastards at CNN and MSNBC beating the drum of, these rabble-rousers, these woke people, when they're trying to do that kind of stuff, you just remember to yourself, no different than Fox News. Remember that. So you don't go conning yourself into thinking that you've got friends and allies in places where you don't and never have. The white media is priming a narrative that is meant to be a nail in the coffin of black empowerment. And that is that they're going to say that woke, which means this black agenda that we're putting forward, why, that's going to be on the ballot next year. It's going to be a referendum. So that no matter how it turns out, if the Democrats retain control of the House and the Senate, they'll be patting themselves on the back and saying, see, nobody ran as woke, and we knew that we couldn't win on that woke stuff, so we didn't even try. And if the Republicans manage to take back the House or the Senate or both, they'll say, you know what it was? It was that woke stuff. It was that woke stuff that lost it for us, just like Nigger Jim Clyburn did. Oh, Neely Fuller, he was absolutely dead on the money. White supremacy believes in taking both sides of the argument.